So thank you for the council for organising this tonight. I think it's really important. I know the floods happened, 18 months, nearly 2 years ago now, but disasters like that are likely to happen again, and I think a lot of what we're talking about tonight can be applied to other aspects of farming in general as well, so not just talking about one-off events, but events in general. So I hope you get a lot out of tonight. About me, I'm based in southwest Victoria. We went through some flooding around the same time you guys did. I mainly focus on on-farm advice and also trials with the Pasture Trial Network. So as I go through tonight, if you've got any questions, feel free to yell them out. Otherwise, I'll have some question time at the end. So I work for Meridian Agriculture. So Meridian, we've been going since 1983, which I haven't been there for quite that long. But Meridian, we're quite an interesting company. So we sort of focus in three key areas. So the profitability, people and production. And we like to think of businesses like you would a tyre with three different valves. And we kind of tell people if all your valves aren't inflated equally, you won't have a smooth ride. So I obviously focus down here on the production aspect. And so, I can help people grow really good grass and have really good soil. But if your HR is not really great and if your profitability is not great because you went out and bought a new tractor without sort of thinking it through, probably not going to have the best ride. So that's how we like to think of it. And we've got consultants that work across the three areas and we refer people out. So even if I'm telling people put fertiliser out, we might actually go have a talk to someone from the profitability area first. But on to what we're here to talk about tonight, the floods. So just by show of hands, just so I get a feel of the room, what sort of farms is everyone from? Are we off small farms, big farms, pasture-based? Well, put your hand up if you're beef. So if you're beef dairies? Yeah? Cropping? If you're croppers, yeah? Under 50 acres? Yeah? So look, there is a good mix in the room, but again, a lot of these things we're going to talk about tonight, you will be able to apply to, I think, a lot of different farms that are pasture-based. I'm not touching too much on cropping, but I think some of the general principles you'd be able to apply to cropping as well. So there's sort of two main types of flooding we sort of talk about. There's the flash flooding, which is obviously where the water comes up super quickly. That's where we see the greatest loss of livestock and potentially people as well. And then we've got that slow onset, which we find is the most damaging to pasture. So if we have that quick one, it's up, it's gone, it's down again. Most sun pasture's not even damaged. That slow one, it can sit there, especially this time of year if it happens. It's cold, it's wet, it's miserable. Pastures die, there's no feed for stock. It gets really miserable on ground. And then we have issues around waterlogged soils. On a year-to-year basis, are people struggling with waterlogged soils around here? Yeah, a few people, yes, yeah. So it's a big problem in the Western District, and it's something I think we're slowly starting to get our heads around the management of. So this is actually down at the Hamilton DPI. And so when I talk to people about their pastures and their pasture planning, this was something I was really asked to touch on tonight. I like to think about what does your pasture look like all year round. So that's the Hamilton DPI there. I wouldn't be going putting, annual ryegrass because it would not be a happy plant there. Because it's like that, well, not this year, unfortunately, but most years around this time, that paddock looks like that. Even, like, that picture was probably taken 20 years ago, but most years that looks like that. And I know some of you on your farms probably have areas where you go on a normal year would have areas that look the same. So if you have the opportunity, when you're redoing laneways, have a think about areas where you can put in fencing, or is there holding yards, or where can you lay out your farm to utilise it so it will be dry, or where can you put things? Are you going to put something, so say your stockyards, where you know it's going to get wet every year? Personally, I wouldn't. I would put that up somewhere dry. And so if you know you've got waterlogged soils, have a think about the type of plants you're putting in. So Barrenbrug Seeds is just up in Albury up the road, but there's lots of different seed companies all around here. Go talk to your local store. There's lots of trials around. Things like tall fescues and phalaris that have the long roots, perennial ryegrass, again long roots, do all right in waterlogging soils. They're a bit more tolerant. Tall fescues also okay with salinity to an extent. Something like lucerne generally doesn't. There's a lot of new varieties though coming on the market. So that's something that if you're looking at, say, the PTN, the Pasture Trial Network, has an e-tool where you can kind of look at the different varieties and where it was growing so you can get a feel of them. And the other thing to think about is stock containment areas. So if you know every year a significant part of your farm gets waterlogged and you're feeding out, and even like this year where it's very dry, if you have a part of your farm that you know you can you can put all your stock in and feed out in, you know that they're not pugging that soil, which is really important, because what we often find is people have left stock in the farm throughout the colder months, throughout the wet months, where there actually wasn't any grass growing, but made them feel good because they were on grass, even though they weren't biting anything. But they were still feeding out. The pasture there's got pugged. We now have to go in, plough up everything, re-sow everything, where if we move that stock off during autumn, we probably would have been able to save that pasture. So just having a think about, is there any way you can containment feed? So stock planning. So I think this is really critically important. I don't think it's something we as an industry have done well. I think for, say, bushfire planning, it's something we do really well. Most people I know don't have a flood plan. Do you have an access to clean water? If there is a long-term flood, is there clean water for your stock? Do you have a refuge mound? Where are you going to move your animals? Can all your animals be put together? Do you have bulls? Can the bulls be put with the rest of the livestock? There is a farm that I deal with where a third of their farm is actually across a little creek. The way they normally move those sheep to that side of the farm is just push them across the creek. That was all well and good till about 18 months ago, and that creek was suddenly 10 metres deep, and most of their sheep were on that side of the farm where there was no equipment, and they had to do a 20-minute drive every day to go and feed them. In the end, they went and got a truck to bring them back around. You know, in future now, hopefully they'll move them back across the creek if there's signs of big rains coming. But you know your farms, you know how your farm is laid out. Have a think about where maybe you can be putting your animals and where you could be putting refuge mounds and where you can be putting animals. Also think about if an animal has young at foot, they're going to be slower to move. Do you need to move them earlier than you move other animals? Another thing to be really thinking about, and I don't think it's something we touch on a lot, is the breeding. So there's the Australian sheep breeding values, there's similar ones for cattle, there's similar, dairy has their own ones. There's things for like feet and for worms where you can actually breed in resistance into animals. And that's something that I think we forget in the dry years, and then in the wet years suddenly all these feet problems appear, apart from the people that have been breeding for it. So if you've got the chance to choose a ram, majority of studs have their numbers up. If they don't have their numbers up, why do they not have their numbers up? Be choosing an animal that has values that you need in your flock. And that's really important, especially if now you are rebuilding your flock. Also, if you're fencing, there's certain fences that can flop when they've got material and debris built up. Talk to your local CMA, talk to your local land care groups. They're a lot more knowledgeable about that on fencing than I am. There's certain types that will work really well and hopefully stop that damming effect. Obviously, if the whole Murray's flooding, it probably won't have that same effect, but for those little flash floods, it might have a really good effect. So these are some other things I think we really need to talk about as well. So once the floods happen, what do we need to think about? What's happened to your feed? If you have a stack of hay and silage, which a lot of us normally do, has it been water inundated? what's the quality of that water? A lot of our flood water is not clean water. A lot of that hay and silage will not be safe to be fed out. You need to be really checking if it has been water inundated, to be getting rid of it. If it can also catch fire. It's something you may need to look at moving quite quickly. And if there is some dry stuff, moving to a place that will continue to be dry. Again, with the water, you need to watch for algae blooms. Sorry, I've got some feedback there. Even if the water is safe to drink, it might taste different to the animals. They might not like to drink it. You know, like when we go to a different town and the water tastes different, we don't like drinking it. These poor animals, their water's been flood affected. Of course, they're not going to like to drink it. So that might be something else we need to watch for. That yes, they've got access to water that looks clean to us. Does it taste good to them? Are they actually drinking? Another thing to have a think about is agistment, especially if you've been flooded and it's going to take a long time for your pasture to recover. Some insurance policies actually cover agistment, so it's worth checking if yours does. And it might be something you need to act really quickly on, because good agistment in the area will go fast. And it's something probably you can even have a chat beforehand about where you might agist animals out to. And it will allow your pastures that time for you to re-sow and recover your pastures. Animal welfare is really important. So AgVic is normally on the ground quite quickly, we've found, with these disasters. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, depends how inundated they are. But at the end of the day, if you're the owner of those animals, you are the one responsible for their health and well-being. So if they need to be humanely put down, you need to have a plan for that. You need to have a plan of where you're going to dispose of them, because unfortunately those bodies are going to build up. Also, it can be very distressing for both yourself and your workers about those bodies being around, so you may want to have a think about that and your own health. And just general health as well. So this is where it's really good to be engaged with your local vet, or if you're in a Best Lamb, Best Wool group or a Better Beef group, having a chat about, are you seeing issues with feet or parasites, bacterial disease, mastitis? We had a lot of issues in the west with mastitis last year. It wasn't flooding, but it was really wet, and just that wet grass gave a lot of issues of mastitis. And even if you're not in those groups, even just going down to your local rural store and having a chat, a lot of those guys will see what they're selling a lot of and know what's going on in the district. Even if you're not going in there all the time, they will, and they're more than happy to have a chat most of the time. And if they're not, go to another rural store. So when we talk about livestock as well, so say we've got sheep, you might want to be checking their wool, see if they've got lumpy wool going on. Parasites might be an issue for several months afterwards. So there's things that we may want to do, like vaccinating. There's different vaccinations. This is again something that you might want to have a discussion with your vet about, and it might be, a lot of vets may have like a little open session or give out a newsletter or something like that, but just give your vet a call and say, is there anything you'd recommend for my flock? They know what your vaccination schedule is like, but having your flock up to date with their vaccines is probably the best prevention for a lot of this. You may also want to do a drench, again, with all the parasites going around. One really important thing to have a think about is your breeding objectives going forward, especially if you've lost a lot of stock, or if you're suddenly dealing with lots of wet ground, or you're likely to be dealing with wet ground going forward. What's your breeding objectives? You also might need to destock for a while, your livestock agent, and you might come to the agreement that you need to destock. So which animals is your priority to destock? So having really clear breeding objectives between you and your livestock agent, I think, is a really good plan, so you know which animals to go first. So pasture recovery is going to look different on everyone's farm. So as we said before, there's some people here on quite small properties. So in an ideal world, we would rest the paddocks. I understand if you're on a small property, that's not possible. Ideally, you'd move the stock off and you'd just recover the paddock. You may also have lots of silt build-up, and you may need to think about removing that. What I would say though, before you did any re-sowing, was to get a soil test done. You can get a pretty comprehensive soil test done now for about $150. It's a lot cheaper than any fertiliser you'll buy, and at least you know what you're putting out's needed or not. There's still a lot of fertiliser I find being put out without a soil test. Realistically, I think it should be done nearly every year, if not every second year, soil testing, so you know what's going on in your soil. I think it's relatively cheap. I know it's a bit of a pain to do it. You can do it yourself though, really. There's some really good guides. Gecko Clan, who's based in the northeast here, they've got some really good guides about how to do some soil testing. I think it's really vitally important for every farm, every operation to be doing soil testing if you're spending money on fertiliser or any sort of soil improvement, because you don't know what you have if you don't have one. I'll touch on it a bit more in a minute, but weed management will be critically important. We often find when there's been disruption to pasture, which there often is when there's been a flood, the weeds, there'll be odd weeds that come up. There'll be weeds that you haven't seen there ever or in 20 years will suddenly appear. You haven't done anything wrong, it's just what happens. When you're re-sowing, if there's still a lot of water in the soil, so if you've got those really waterlogged soils, tillage radish, oddly enough, is one of those, that's meant to be a tillage radish, so that white thing. It doesn't look much like a tillage radish on the PowerPoint. Tillage radish actually helps draw up a lot of that moisture and sort of restore some of that soil health. And so that can be a good summer crop or a crop to suck up that soil moisture. It is one that tends to like a bit more soil moisture, so it's probably not one to put in if you're going into a dry summer. If you're going in a new pasture, as tempting as it is to rush back straight into a perennial pasture, personally, I would do sort of an annual rotation first, just to make sure we've cleared up all those weeds. We've got time to see if there's any issues going to pop its head up before we actually move into planting, you know, your phalaris or a perennial pasture, a perennial ryegrass or anything like that. And again, yes, it is another year, but there's some really good annuals out there nowadays, and I think it's just worth that little bit of extra time, especially if you've got a perennial that's going to persist for a number of years, especially if it will be majority weed free. So if you do have the opportunity to rest your paddocks, once you reintroduce them, most of it is just sensible grazing. So graze it rotationally if we can, graze it slowly. Only let them have access to sort of what they need in front of them. Even if you just can get some electrical tape like they have for the horses and put that out, that can normally contain the sheep enough, and just make sure they've got enough feed and they normally don't jump to the fence. They're normally not too wild. I have seen some sheep that I don't think any fence ever will keep them. It doesn't matter how much feed they have. But, you know, if we can try and make sure that they're somewhat maintained, and it will just make sure your pasture has the best chance of recovery. And again, making sure they've got access to water, and those watering points and their shade points are sensible again, so they're not having to track all back across that pasture to access that. So I've only listed a few of the weeds. I haven't listed all of them, but I did have a chat with a few people about some weeds they're seeing in the local area. So please forgive me if these aren't what you're having on your place. But I think it's really important we talk about how they're spread. So if after a flood they're not on your place, they could have come by the water. The water spreads a lot of these weeds. Another way is just organic material. You could have bought the moisture from the flood, could have just bought them up. Have you bought in feed? That's another way. Have you bought in new stock and not have it in a holding off area? I had one farm where prickly lettuce, of all things, was bought on with new stock in a brand new phalaris paddock, which was really fun to deal with. So yeah, and it just comes down to that. And the other thing is, if you've had people come in to do any sort of maintenance or, you know, flood recovery or new fencing, is their equipment clean? When was the last time you had a contractor or an agronomist or whoever on your farm, and you actually had to look at their tyres or their car to make sure their car was clean. Probably not many of us. But it's something we probably should be doing in reality, because not only is there weeds, but there's diseases that come in as well. So control, for the most part, it's just good biosecurity. I always say the best defence against weeds is a good paddock. Majority of weeds are opportunistic. Some aren't, but the majority of them are just opportunistic. So if you've got good fertility, good ground cover, 9 times out of 10 we won't see a big issue with weeds, or they'll be drowned out by springtime. Watch we don't overgraze the paddock, and just be aware of your local resources. So again, being involved in your land care group, being involved in a best land, best wool group, being involved in a bare beef group, and if there's not a group that has that resource, you can always start one as well. You know, and coming to nights like this as well, if there's particular weeds as well. Your local rural stores might run a night. Yes, they may be trying to sell you herbicide at the end of it, but again, they know what's going on in your area, and they're a fantastic resource. So I just have a couple of the weeds just to go through quickly. You're probably all familiar with these ones, but again, blackberry, you know, widely common around waterways. Once it's established, very hard to control. I think a lot of the land care groups have done fantastic work trying to control these around creeks and that. Personally, I'd get control of it if it was on my place, because stock don't particularly like it, to eat it, unfortunately. If they did, it would make our lives a lot easier. Bathurst burr. This is one that, you know, especially if you're a wool producer, can cause all sorts of mischief with your wool. If you've got shedding sheep, probably not as worried about it, but again, one that you want to get onto early, mainly opportunistic. So it is one that I see people having more of an issue with when they don't have good ground cover. And again, after a flood, it's not your fault that you don't have good ground cover, but that's the reality, is that we don't have good ground cover often after a flood. Now this one, it's really interesting. It actually has animal health issues, especially for horses. So I think a few people said this one came up after the floods. And again, it might not be one you've had before, so if it's one you're not familiar with, yell out. Fleabane, again, I mean, I think most of us would have that somewhere on the farm. It's one, again, I don't really worry about for the most part. People just have a little bit around because it normally sorts itself out. Wireweed, wireweeds are very... Would everyone have a wireweed somewhere on the farm? Around a shed or something? Yeah. Again, really common one. I only tend to stress about if it's getting big, because it can get tangled in machinery. It tends to respond really well to broadleaf sprays in general when it's small. Fortunately, when it tends to get to like that size on the left, it gets a bit harder to control. So again, it's just, there's a proverb, someone told me it was a Chinese proverb, I'm not sure, that the best fertiliser is the farmer's footsteps, and I think that's really true with pasture maintenance. So if you're walking around your pastures, having a look what's there, you're going to get onto things a lot earlier than when you can see it from the highway and somebody's called in a complaint. Skeleton weed, yeah, again, look, most of these weeds, and hairy panic. So all those weeds, you might have them generally on your farm, you might never see them only in a flood. Again, a lot of them are opportunistic. A lot of them you'll probably see more around sheds than anything else. It's something I think, be aware of what's around. If you're not good with Weed ID, there's even some apps now you can get that are really good with taking a picture, and 9 times out of 10 it will tell you what the weed is. I would say just be careful, because every now and again it doesn't. If you will, for a minute, I just want to talk about some of the new biosecurity laws that are coming in. I'll just turn my page, make sure I get this right. So this sign is from the VFF. I mean, they gave me these for free, so I'm sure if you ask, they will as well. And I've got some up the front if anybody wants to take them. And you can put these on the gate. So part of these came in part of the new 2021 legislation. You need to have one of these and a farm plan. I'll send some links for council to email around to everybody about what you need to do. But part of it is if somebody does trespass on your farm without permission, they can receive quite a substantial fine. So I think for organisations, I've got written down actually, organisations can receive up to a $55,000 fine for trespassing. So it's quite significant. This even includes people that are allowed to be there, like say you've got the telephone lines or something on your property and they need to do maintenance. Part of it is they need to call you still first and abide by your biosecurity. So whether that's, cleaning the car, cleaning the boots, all that jazz. And then you also know who's been on and off your property, which I think is really critically important. Going through the plan, because I was a bit worried when they said you have to do a plan to go with it, it was going to be very tedious. It's not. They've actually made it quite simple, thankfully. I think most of it is things everybody here would probably be doing on your farm anyway. It's just actually writing it down. I think it's probably worth everybody doing it because one, it gives you that protection against trespassers, and two, it sort of shows as an industry we're trying to do the right thing. And your part of it is you need to be able to charge someone with trespass. You need to have a sign on the fence saying you don't want trespassers on your fence. No, that sounds really silly, but I don't come up with the laws, unfortunately. So I've got a big stack of these up the front, so please come and grab one. And if there's not enough, I can give the link so we can get some more down here. So I think in summary, I just want to make sure everybody, when we're thinking about floods and waterlogged soils, we're not just thinking about what's happening in the moment, because I think it's really easy to get caught up that what's happened now and what we need to do now to fix it. But we're also thinking about when we're setting up our farms or renovating our farms, what we can do to prevent it. Where are we putting our laneways? Where are we putting our high traffic areas? If we're putting in drainage, for instance, there's actually a group that can come around and radar with this LiDAR device your whole farm and tell you the best places to put drainage in. Now, this was probably more aimed to the croppers in the room rather than the smallholder dairy farms because, most of my dairy farmers wouldn't mind a little bit of water on their farm. However, again, if waterlogging was a constant problem on your farm and you were spending a whole lot on pasture renovations every 2 years because your pasture wasn't surviving, it might be something worth looking into. So I think there's lots of solutions to problems. It's just about making sure that we're having a think about it before the issues come here. If you do a plan for your flooding as to when to move livestock off, where your feed is stored, is your feed stored up high under shelter, etc., it might be worth making sure the other people that work on your farm know about this plan. Making sure your neighbours, if you are going away during a time of flooding, your neighbours know about this plan and may be able to help you carry it out, because there's no point having this fantastic plan if it lives in your head and nobody else is aware of it. And also just remember your own safety as well. So there has been a few tragic accidents with people trying to move livestock and trying to feed out livestock during floods. And so we have to remember our own safety is probably the priority here.